There's more breaking news coming into the Situation Room right now. We just got an important ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court on President Trump's attempt to remove a top federal watchdog. Our chief Supreme Court analyst, Joan Biskupic, is joining us right now. So what did the High Court just say, Joan?
Sure. Good to see you, Wolf. This is the very first Supreme Court test of Donald Trump's second-term agenda. And I can tell you that the justices already were struggling. They essentially punted. This case, as you said, involved President Trump's ability to remove an appointee of President Biden who should have been able to serve a full 5-year term. He was just appointed last year, but Donald Trump is trying to remove this man. And lower courts had put a pause on Donald Trump's effort. He had come to the Supreme Court, then appealing, and the justices said, we're not going to quite decide yet. We're going to let this man, Hampton Dellinger, who's over this watchdog agency, stay in place for now, but we're going to revisit this probably after next Wednesday, when a lower court is going to have a hearing on the merits of this case over whether President Trump can remove this individual. This all goes to, as you know, Wolf, Donald Trump's efforts to really flex his executive branch authority. He's trying to remove so many people from offices. This is one of literally dozens of lawsuits that are now percolating. And in this first one, the justices were not quite ready to say the extent of President Trump's power, but they did. This is a partial win for the challengers to Donald Trump, because they're letting this individual, Hampton Dellinger, stay in office. So you know what the president had wanted was for the court to immediately say he has to go. Now there was a split in how the justices decided this, and let me just lay it out. First of all, it was an unsigned opinion, but the majority was saying that it needed to postpone any action till at least next week. Justices Gorsuch and Alito, two conservatives, said that they would have sided with President Trump and let him act in this case. Two of the strongest liberals, Justices Sotomayor and Jackson, said they would have totally sided with the challengers here, with Mr. Dellinger. So it shows you that we get a little bit of a glimpse of some of the dilemma of the justices in this first major test, and we're just going to keep seeing them come week after week after week, Wolf.
Sure we will. All right, Joan, thank you very much for that update. I want to bring in our legal experts to assess what's going on. Jennifer Rogers, how big of a setback potentially is this for the Trump administration?
Well, we don't know yet, Wolf. They've really just put it on pause. This isn't the merits of the matter. This case came up on a temporary restraining order, and there's a question as to whether a temporary restraining order is even appealable in the first case. So that may be where the justices kind of got sideways. Some of them wanted to hear it on this basis, others maybe didn't. That may be why they've come out the way they did right now, but we won't know until they take the case on the merits what the court thinks of what the case is really about, which is what obstacles can Congress place in the way of the president in firing someone like the special counsel. There's been kind of a narrowing over the years of Congress's ability to stop the president from firing people inside of the executive branch. And so we won't know until we actually get a merits ruling what the court is going to do on that question.
Steve Vladeck is also with us. He's an expert on the Supreme Court. You know the court well, Steve. Are you surprised, first of all, by this?
A little surprised, Wolf. I mean, I think it's odd for the court to issue a ruling that says we're not going to issue a ruling. But I mean, Jennifer's right that the procedural way this got to the court has a lot to do with why the middle of the court has acted the way it did. I think you had some real wariness, not just from one end of the court, from the other, of what would happen if the court started inviting the Trump administration or other litigants to come up to the court, even when all that's happened in the first lower court is a temporary restraining order. And so, you know, Wolf, I'm a little surprised that they're deciding to not decide, but I think two critical points are the one Jennifer made, that they're still going to have to decide this sooner rather than later. And Wolf, two, you know, this is about as good a case as there is for the Trump administration when it comes to the strength of the arguments against the removal protection for the special counsel. There's a reason why the Department of Justice wanted to bring this case to the justices first. Even if the court ultimately sides with President Trump, we shouldn't assume that that's an indicator of where it's going to go in the rest of its cases. In the flip side, Wolf, if Hampton Dellinger survives, if the court actually sides with Dellinger as early as next week, that's not just a big blow to Trump here. That is a sign that this court's going to be much more aggressive, pushing back against President Trump than I think a lot of people might expect.
Elise Adamson is still with us as well. Elise, as you know, many of the conservative justices on the Supreme Court have traditionally favored executive power, certainly in past cases. So what does that tell you about what they may ultimately decide in this case?
Yes, Wolf. And I think we saw that just in what we just heard from the reporting with Gorsuch and Alito, willing to take up the case on the merits rather than deciding to not decide, as has just been described. I do think that we have seen an extreme expansion in the interpretation of executive power, and this is a real test. There's a federal law that created this Office of Special Counsel, and Congress tried to make very clear the reasons why an individual could be terminated. They tried to outline this. And so this is going to be a test of the separation of powers. And so I think we can expect to see this court continue on their streak of their interpretation of executive power. And I do think there is a chance that the Supreme Court will rule in the Trump administration's favor in this case for those reasons.
Jennifer Rogers, our legal analyst, is still with us. Jennifer, this was, as we noted, the first U.S. Supreme Court test of the second Trump administration. So how should we read into this for future cases? What do you think?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, as Steve was just saying, this is a unique case, and the circumstances of this case won't necessarily hold over to some others. That's probably why the Trump administration wanted to take it up first. So even if they win, I don't know that it tells us a lot. But I mean, a lot of cases are in the process of making their way up to the Supreme Court. So we may learn some things about the way the splits go with the justices on one side or the other. Maybe it'll give us a little bit of a clue, but of course, every case is different. So it will depend on the facts too.
We're always looking for those clues. Everyone, thank you very, very much.